Professor David Hirsch is well known for his analysis of neoliberal education reform in the USA. Here he describes how control of education has moved from the local into a few distant hands.
What we've seen in the United States is in fact that historically decisions about education was made at the local level, where school districts or schools made decisions about what textbooks to use, what the curriculum would be, and how they would assess students. And now politicians run on a platform of improving education. Politicians like to talk about education because it diverts attention from other problems. So rather than talking about poverty in schools, or rather than talking about unemployment, or about the lack of health care or other issues, education becomes the focus because it's something in which politicians can appear to be making a difference, appearing to be doing good, and then shifting blame on the schools, which means also that if it doesn't come out the way that you want, then you just blame the teachers. And so you don't have to take responsibility for those failures either. So it's all success, no fear of getting blamed.
In parallel with growing politicisation of education, there's been a rise of standardisation and testing at all levels of schooling.
What we've seen over the last 20 years in the United States is this creeping use of standardized testing. First it was initiated with just some standardized tests at the high school level, then it became standardized tests at other grades 3 through 8, and now we have standardized tests at every grade. Standardized tests have a negative consequence of their own in terms of narrowing the curriculum, etc. But they also have other effects in that now the test scores become something that they become political, in which they represent the success or failure of educational policies by those who are designing and developing the tests, or at least paying for those to be done. So it becomes in the political interest of people who are making educational policy and to make sure that the test scores make them look good. And to demonstrate that they're improving it, they have to have improving test scores, or it can easily lead to politicians manipulating the test scores for their own purposes.
Hardly a week goes by in the USA without a school or school district being charged with falsifying the tests, but political appointees are frequently investigated as well for falsifying and rigging results. Indeed, Hirsch argues that the testing regime of Bush's No Child Left Behind policy was designed so that thousands of poor city schools would have little chance of reaching the targets that would save them from privatisation. Testing in the USA has also been driven by business and philanthropic interests who benefit financially from the trend. The most extensive use of testing is under the Common Core initiative.
That's been primarily pushed by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a number of other very conservative foundations, and corporations that will profit from the spending on the Common Core, because they will also be ones who will be developing the tests and doing the assessments. And this includes, most importantly, Pearson Education, but a lot of other for-profit corporations in the United States.
In this context of increased testing, greater surveillance, and the contracting out of advice, growing budget spend on education does not necessarily mean greater expenditure on children. In 2009, the federal government invested $4.3 billion in the Race to the Top program. Professor Hirsch says that schools in his state actually lost money on the deal.
Well, under the Race to the Top, half the money that went to New York State went to the State Department of Education, which they were having, because of state cutbacks in funding, they in fact only had about half the staff they previously had. So they were so glad to get this money because they could fill positions and make themselves again a bigger player. And in fact, they instantly became a bigger player because they now were setting policy that affected everybody. But they were collecting all of a sudden $350 million. And then they gave a significant part of that remaining money to Pearson and for-profit corporations to develop the tests, to develop the standards, develop the curriculum, to grade the tests, and only a very small amount to the schools, too small for most schools to carry out the mandates of Race to the Top. So it was a win-win for the Department of Ed. Corporations benefit. The only ones who didn't benefit from the money, and in fact for many we're now having to spend more money than they were receiving to carry out the mandates, were schools. So the only one that consistently harms us are people who work in schools.